program,
This
which, by the
conference will
way,
now be recorded.
I know that people listening here are from all over the country, including Hawaii. Aloha. So I don't know if you were down at the World Trade Center site or responded during the 8 months that followed, but Congress did the right thing and they created the World Trade Center Health Program and the Victim Compensation Fund. And the health program is national and it provides free health care to people all over the country who either came to the Pentagon or to the World Trade Center site and who have since come down with any of the 68 cancers that have been linked to the toxins or the respiratory illnesses as well. So we know that 90,000 people so far have registered in the health program, yet only, let me get this right, I'm only going to guess about 30,000 people have received awards from the Victim Compensation Fund. They're waiting for another 20,000 that are pending. And we feel that in the next year and a half, there'll probably be another 20,000. But so figure that gives you the rough people who have actually taken advantage of this. But we know that 400,000 people are in the 9/11 community. That makes up about 100,000 responders, 25,000 people who lived in Lower Manhattan, and 300,000 people who were either students, teachers, office workers. So that's about 450,000, 500,000 people. You're talking about the size of Tampa or New Orleans. It's a
Right.
large community.
Huge. So how far north on Manhattan does the limit stretch?
Great question. So in order to be eligible for the health program, you had to either live or work or respond south of Houston Street.
Okay.
In order to be eligible for compensation, you have to first be found eligible and certified by the health program with a physical injury, and you had to have been south of Canal Street. There's a big 10 block difference between Canal and Houston Street.
Sure.
Why they made this distinction was purely political. We had trouble convincing enough people outside the New York area that this pain that New Yorkers are going through is ongoing. And the best way I have to convince these people is to show that it's not just the people, as you can see on your screen now, who were caught in the dust cloud, but the people who came back to work after the EPA assured us that the air is safe, to the responders who came from all over the country to help out when New York needed them. Well, those people were exposed to the same toxins as the firefighters and the police officers on the first day. So all these people are eligible. And again, if they were south of Canal Street and they're diagnosed and certified by the health program with a physical illness, they're going to get compensation from the Victim Compensation Fund.
Mm-hmm. So if you lived in the greater New York area and you came into work after they opened up the area, say 3 or 4 months after, or however, I'm not sure how long it was shut, Lower Manhattan was shut. Are you still eligible if you were working there 3 or 4 months later, coming in every day?
Well, I'll tell you something really horrifying. It wasn't 3 or 4 months later. They took the EPA administrator, Christy Todd Whitman, the former New Jersey governor. She made an announcement 5 days after the attacks that the air is safe. So they opened Wall Street the following week.
Wow.
And my building, I mean, I'm lucky. I'm 2 blocks from ground zero. I'm, quote, lucky that I had no electricity for 5 weeks. So we couldn't be down here until mid-October, which probably was a good thing for my health, although I have 7 men and women in my office with cancer. So clearly, I mean, if you were getting out of the subways, you were walking around Lower Manhattan. And if you were staying here all day, I got to tell you, if you weren't here, you can't quite comprehend the stench. The smell was overwhelming, and we called it the smell of death, and that's really what it was, decomposing bodies. They only found a third of the people who died that day. Everybody else was either burning up because those buildings were on fire for 99 days.
Sure, sure. So if you came in and you worked, some people within a week after the disaster, and those people came down with cancer, then they're eligible for the Victims' Compensation Fund?
Absolutely. And the free health care. Let's not forget about that. That's critical. I know a lot of people who listen in on this, they know just how devastating the cost of cancer is. It's not just the emotional and physical cost, but it can bankrupt you. All these out-of-pocket expenses, all these co-pays. So
Sure.
the health program is a wonderful asset for the 9/11 community, but you have to know about it. You have to, and here's my big problem, and it makes sense sort of. If you remember that the EPA said the air is safe, and then 10 years later, you're living now, you're retired, you're living in North Carolina or Florida, Arizona, Hawaii, and you come down with thyroid cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, skin cancer. Why would you connect the dots? Why would you think, oh, maybe there's a chance that the government did the right thing and opened up a healthcare program? And if I'm certified, I'm eligible for compensation. So that's why I'm asking all my clients, all of the people listening on your end, if you live in a state with, and I'll be blunt, with Republican senators who have not yet voted to support this bill that's pending in Senate. It's bill number 546. We need their votes because people from every state now are getting sick. And NIOSH has made a presumption that all these cancers were caused by that exposure, whether it was 4 hours in the first 4 days or 24 hours in the month of September. Your cancer is considered linked, and you should take advantage of the programs that the government has set up for you.
So let me bring in Dr. Bard a little bit. And Dr. Bard, what you've been diagnosing people with World Trade Center related illnesses for many, many years now. I mean, where do you see these people coming from?
Well, actually, let me add on to what Michael just said, because I had a patient in from California. My imaging technology is so unique that people come from really all parts of the United States to see me because I'm the only person with the true 3D Doppler system for prostate and some other cancers like skin cancers. But particularly, I had a patient and he came in for his prostate exam. And because we had been talking about the 9/11 breast cancer, I mentioned to him that if any of your friends have, developed breast or prostate cancer, let me know. And he told me that because he was one of the top people in the news organizations, the day after 9/11, personally escorted by the United States Marine Corps down to see the World Trade Center burning so he could have a firsthand view. So people come from all over, and you don't know when they were in New York. And of course, you do not connect the dots to your illness being living in California.
Now, let's just go back briefly to this World Trade Center health program. In order to be eligible for that program, first of all, which pays your medical expenses, do you have to be certified by somebody like yourself, Dr. Bard?
Well, that's a question for Michael.
So in order to be eligible for the Victim Compensation Fund, you must be certified by the health program. But it all starts with people like Dr. Bard, who will tell people, because Dr. Bard actually knows about this, whereas most oncologists and other doctors don't even think that there could be a connection. So someone like Dr. Bard is going to say and know to ask in his intake, oh, were you down at the lower Manhattan on 9/11 or during any part of the 8 months that followed? And most doctors don't know to ask that question. So that's a big reason for our outreach.
So you ask the question, the patient says, yes, I work there. I worked at One Chase Manhattan Plaza, and I came into work every day within a few weeks of the disaster. Then what happens? Then that person then files an application to be considered by the World Trade Center Health Program?
Exactly, but they also have to submit with their application 2 proof of presence affidavits or an employer affidavit. Something, I mean, look, we want to make sure there is no fraud here. You're talking about free health care, which can be, hundreds of thousands of dollars if you have cancer. We're talking about compensation for people with pain and suffering and lost income in many cases if they have cancer or serious respiratory problems. And we want to, the government has an interest, but so does my law firm. We want to make sure that this is run correctly. So the government requires 2 affidavits from everyone, and they're sworn to under oath. The Department of Justice often calls up the affiants to make sure that the person is telling the truth. And then once you submit those affidavits with a pathology report showing the type of cancer it is, the date it was diagnosed, because you got to remember, all these cancers have latency periods. So if somebody was diagnosed on September 12th, 2001, clearly it wouldn't be considered related to the toxic exposure. So most of the cancers, some of the cancers have different latency periods, but most of the cancers are all considered linked if they were diagnosed after September of 2005. So you have to show a pathology report. You have to, if you want to show the severity of the cancer, you show the operative reports, you show these the affidavits, and then almost always there's an examination, unless the patient is too sick to come in for that examination. They have to go to a health program, and then within a month of that, they get certified. Once I get the certification letter, I can then submit an application to the Victim Compensation Fund, and that usually takes about another year.
Okay, so how does Dr. Bard fit into this equation?
Dr. Bard is one of the few doctors that I know that actually understands the link between environmental toxins and all these cancers, and I'll defer to him to tell you what he knows about that, because that's way above my pay grade.
Okay.
Go into what I do. Basically, I have been doing cancer screening for 45 years. So I'm aware of the different types of cancer, and I have a reputation for having equipment that can find certain cancers, specifically bladder, prostate, skin cancers, that very few other people can find without the special imaging equipment that is available, but only used by very few people in the United States. So when I screen people, if I find a bladder cancer, I ask them, are you exposed to toxins? Or at your work, at World Trade Center? I ask questions. So if they say they were exposed, then they have to go the route of applying to the Victims' Compensation Program, showing that they were actually there. But let's go about latency period, which is very important. For example, last week, I had a U.S. Marine come in as a patient. I told him, after I scanned his prostate, I said, look, this is the good news. The good news is you have prostate cancer. The bad news is that you have to fly back from Kandahar, Afghanistan, in 6 months to make sure it hasn't spread. So what we do is unique, and this recognizes the fact that some cancers are very aggressive, but most cancers are not that aggressive and can be followed. So when possible, we try to save patients from having invasive procedures. Of course, to document things, we have to finally document it with a biopsy, but still, you can tell people with known cancer how fast it's spreading and if it's spread at all. For example, we had a woman come in with a breast lump last year, And because I was in the loop on the World Trade Center, I asked her if she knew anybody who was downtown there. And she said, yeah, I was one of the nurses who worked down there myself. So after we found the suspicious lump in the breast, we simply took the same probe, moved it to under the arm, and made sure that there were no lymph node metastases. And then we had to lie down, took a different probe, and put it over the liver to make sure that there were no liver metastases. And then a different machine in the office checks for lymph nodes in the groin or around the aorta. So we can do cancer staging all at the same time with this technology.
I see. So talk to us a little bit about other diseases that are non-cancer diseases that might be eligible for both the health fund and for victim compensation.
Well, if you can put the flyer up that I sent you, there are many respiratory illnesses that have been linked. Interestingly, this bill, there you go, the Zedroga Healthy Compensation Act was named after my client, New York City Police Detective James Zedroga. And Jimmy, he didn't even have cancer, but he died of pulmonary fibrosis in 2006. And that's just an insidious pulmonary disease. It's also called coal miner's lungs, I think. Isn't that right, Dr. Bard?
That's correct. And these are things we can see with the ultrasound technology. But again, let me give you an example of the ignorance in the medical field, like you alluded to earlier. Most people say you can't scan the lung. If you ask any radiologist, they'll say, well, it doesn't work in the lung. I work with a doctor who wrote a textbook on ultrasound of the lungs 10 years ago, textbook, but it's not generally widely understood by the healthcare professionals. So yes, we can see interstitial lung disease. We can actually measure the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the COPD, by looking and measuring diaphragmatic motion while the patient's breathing, inspiration and expiration. You measure it like you measure the heart muscle with the echocardiogram. You get a graph of how good or how bad it is. And once you have a graph or a picture of the interstitial lung disease, you can follow it up in 3 or 6 months or whatever and see if it's getting better or worse. Also, you can objectively, because you have a baseline, you can follow it to see if the treatment's working or not.
So before we talk a little bit more in depth about the actual compensation fund, Michael, what would a patient be entitled to if they were eligible for the health program?
Okay, so that all depends on the type of illness you've been certified with, the severity of the illness. For instance, you and I could have two different types of illnesses, or we could have the same illness, for instance. We both could have severe asthma, right? But it's not going to stop me from being an attorney. Whereas if you were a firefighter, you can't be an attorney anymore with asthma. So the victim fund treats everyone differently, depending on where they are, what they come, what their job was. If I have 5 years of lost work because of my illness, but you have 15 years more lost income, well, you're going to get a bigger economic loss award. So it's not a cookie cutter thing. Everybody's different, but in general, let's just talk about non-economic loss. The awards for non-lethal illnesses that aren't going to kill you, like mild asthma, sinusitis, sleep apnea. I'm not saying that they don't interfere with your enjoyment of life. They most certainly do, but you're not going to die from those. And the Victim Compensation Fund law specifically directs the special master to give much more money to people with cancer, as it should. So the minor respiratory illnesses are getting approximately $20,000. The skin cancers and the serious pulmonary illnesses are getting $90,000. and almost all the other cancers are getting 250,000. And if you have multiple cancers, well, then you're going to get 340,000. That's the most that the special master is allowed to give for the non-economic loss. And as I said earlier, economic loss gets more. And if you die from a 9/11 illness, then your estate is entitled to another $250,000 for your passing, and your each spouse and dependent child gets another 100,000. Again, that's all non-economic loss. The economic loss is an addition. Now, having said all that, I have to say, and many of you who read the newspapers are aware of this, because so many people in the 9/11 community have been getting sick and dying. I mean, seriously, not a day goes by without one of my clients dying. It's horrifying. So the special master was given $7 billion, and it was supposed to last until the end of 2020, when the Victim Compensation Fund is supposed to close. But her actuaries came up and looked at how much money she was giving away and said, hold it, you don't have enough money to make it until the end of 2020. So the special master in February announced immediate cuts of 50% to every claim that is pending. Whoa. And every new claim that is made after February is going to be reduced 70%. Talk about a breach of promise by the government that said, we'll take care of you after misleading you about the air quality. So I've been going down to Washington every month for the last 6 months. I go with about 24 other responders, former students, teachers, local residents, and we're lobbying Congress. And that's why I said earlier, we now have over 230 representatives in the House who have agreed to co-sponsor this bill that was a bipartisan bill, by the way, because as I said earlier, this was bipartisan toxic dust. So everybody should support this. And
absolutely,
it's a no-brainer. I mean, why wouldn't Congress want to show the American people, hey, we can get together and do the right thing once for our responders who we want to show up at the next emergency, at the next crisis. You don't want them thinking, oh my God, wait a second, what happens if I get hurt or sick or die? Who's going to take care of my family? I know from 9/11, the government won't do it. You don't want your responders even thinking about that. So I'm hopeful that we will get enough support. As I mentioned, we have more than half of the representatives in the House now who have agreed to co-sponsor the bill. We have 32 senators. That sounds great, but we need 60. In this environment, you need more than half to get it done. So we're going to be back in Washington next month, and again in June. Jon Stewart, the 9/11 advocate and comedian, he's been wonderful. He's going to be coming with us and testifying in front of the Judiciary Committee. But we need another 32 senators. Specifically, we need another 8 Republican senators. I can't believe that Senators Rubio and Scott of Florida haven't agreed to co-sponsor yet. I mean, you know, there are over 1,500 New York City firefighters and cops who now live and have retired to Florida. These are voters. These are their constituents. Why wouldn't they vote? And you know, every time there's a hurricane, New York City firefighters and cops are only too happy to drive down to Florida, just like they did to New Orleans after Katrina, just like they did after Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria. That's what we do for the rest of the country. I don't understand how Senator Rubio and Senator Scott won't end up endorsing this. Same with Lindsey Graham. We have so many responders who are now living in South Carolina and in North Carolina. We need them to get on board. And if we got just South Carolina, North Carolina, and Florida, that would be 6 of the 8 Republican senators. Then we're almost there.
Now, this reduction in the awards that you're talking about, this was solely an administrative decision.
That's right. But she also, the law requires her to make sure that this $7 billion lasts all the way to the end of 2020. So she's got to
Uh-huh.
save enough money so that everybody who applies and gets sick in the next 18 months gets something. But I'm almost consider it's so absurd the way it's been set up now. I had a firefighter the other day who got his economic loss award. It was reduced from $445,000 to $14,000.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
insane. And that she did it because she said, well, look, I'm going to give him 50% of his economic loss, but I'm going to reduce it by what the statute says, which is I have to reduce it by his entire disability pension. Well, I'm surprised they didn't ask him to write them a check. It's just so unfair.
Right.
So
Right.
I've got a lot of ammunition. I've got a lot of responders who are calling their senators and congressmen. It's actually really something that I'm not used to doing. I usually represent people and try to get them compensation for their injuries. I've never been in a, well, I did do some lobbying in 2011 and then in 2015, but never when people are looking at these drastic cuts like this.
How do we get the word out, Michael? I mean, is the New York Times covering this in any way? I mean, how do we tell people?
Something I haven't seen any articles in the Times about this. The Daily News and the Post have been great. When I do outreach, I try to let local media know. So I was down in Florida speaking to 400 retired cops in February, and the Sun Sentinel newspaper came out and did a big article. All right, I haven't seen Rubio or Scott get on board yet, but that's the kind of local grassroots outreach we're doing. But having all my clients, I sent out a text blast the other day. Hey, you live in Wyoming. Your senators haven't agreed yet. Call them up. Have all your friends and family call them up. These people in outside of the New York area, so many of them think, oh, this is a New York problem, and they need to be educated. That's the word you used earlier. They need to be educated that their constituents were affected too.
Yeah, wow, wow, wow.
So I appreciate people like you following this, and just these kind of little half-hour seminars are wonderful. Just so that your listeners, maybe they know someone in Florida or North Carolina, they'll call them up and say, "Hey, I heard about this problem. If you think it's serious, call up your senator and let them know this isn't the right way to treat the responders."
Absolutely. And what we will do, of course, is we'll put this recording out and we'll try and spread the word with the recording. People can listen in and they can and should call their senators and bring them on board. I mean, like this guy, isn't there a Republican senator now in Washington State? I forget his name. But if we get to these firefighters in Washington State who are affected, they too need to call their senators and their Congress people.
Right. You're totally right. Thank you for that.
It's everywhere. Let me just go back to the health fund. What is covered by the health fund?
All free. I mean, if you're certified with an illness, they'll pay for all your. They are secondary to your private insurance. So whatever your private insurance will not cover, or let's say you work for the fire department's primary insurance, and then comes the World Trade Center Health Program. They'll pick up all the co-pays and the deductibles, which, as you know, can be huge.
Significant.
Also, even though the Victim Compensation Fund only by statute can only give compensation for physical injuries, the health program will provide much needed and valuable psychological treatment because PTSD is rampant. And I'd like to hear what Dr. Bard has to say about the connection between cancer and PTSD.
I am a member of the Melanoma Research Foundation, which is based in Washington. I was there last week. And through this organization, which is international, they can spread their word. I will bring it to their attention because melanoma, this is a killer. It's a real horrible thing. I'm also a member of the Male Breast Cancer coalition. And it's unusual, but again, this is something that is shocking to the male community. And when they know men can get breast cancer too, they're going to ask their buddies and spread the word. Hey, get yourself checked. So this spreads the awareness of toxins and cancer screening, and of course the World Trade Center. So PTSD, anything that interferes with the body's hormonal balance will affect blood flow in the brain to some extent, and also it will knock out your immune response system. In other words, leaving you less able to counter inflammation, say in the blood vessels of the brain or in the linings that cleanse the lungs. So anything negative in life increases your chance of developing other disease, both neurologic and even psychiatric, because it's all on your whole body system. So it's got to fight, and you're fighting diseases with a weakened immune system as well.
So, I think that this is a sort of a great summary of what people are entitled to if, God forbid, they were caught in the in this horrendous disaster. They didn't have to be in the towers. They could just be coming to work every day for the following year, and they could be very sick now, and they might not even know that they are entitled to something.
That's right.
And, we at AnCan would encourage those people either to reach out to us so we can put them in touch with Michael Barash or Dr. Bard, or you can reach out directly. There will be a link on our website, and you'll find the contact details for Michael and for Dr. Bard. I'll just say it for those who are on the telephone or who are not viewing. Michael Barash is with Barash and McGarry. That's spelled B-A-R-A-S-C-H, and McGarry, M-C, capital G-A-R-R-Y. His phone number is 212-385-8000.
Hey, Rick, it might almost be easier for them if they wanted to learn more. Just go to my website, which is 911victimfund.com.
Okay. So you have that 911victimfund.com, or I guess WTClawyers.com. That's the one we have. Either one. Okay. And Dr. Bard, his website is bardcancerdiagnostics.com. And
I also have an easier website, 911cancerscan.com.
Okay, 911cancerscan.com. There you go.
Right.
And his telephone number is 212-355-7017. And the most important thing is, if you know people that have been impacted, please tell them. And of course, to assist with this very significant lobbying effort. Before we close out, is there anybody on the call who has any questions that they might like to ask either Michael Barash or Dr. Bard?
Well, I don't think it was a huge turnout, but I really appreciate you letting us on today, Rick. And anytime I can just reach one person, it's always valuable. Dr. Bard, always a pleasure to speak with you. And anytime you want us to come back, we're always there for you, okay?
Thank you so much, and we appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll get the word out. And Dr. Bard, I'll be in touch with Len Getz, and we'll make hopefully a very helpful video recording of this session. Thanks very much, gentlemen. Good night.
All right. Have a nice evening, everybody. Bye-bye.